Okay, so let's go to Hebrews chapter 11. We've been in this now for some weeks. And last week we talked about the enduring faith of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, looking beyond the circumstances of their death to the promises of God for the future. Hebrews 11 now fast forwards about 400 years to the enduring faith of Moses and his family. I've given my message this title, Enduring Faith Despite Political Pressure. Enduring Faith Despite Political Pressure. And this is particularly relevant for the people of this church, the church that the writer of Hebrews is writing to, the Hebrew Christians. Right now, our church is concerned, our own local church is concerned with the plight of family members, relatives of our church people in Sudan. They are in a country where there is active persecution of Christians. And their families experienced some of this pressure from other people on a political basis and on a religious basis. Sometimes it's just because they're Christians that they are harassed. So in situations like this, somebody could think, well, if I just sort of kept quiet about my Christianity, if I, compromised the things that I would do, I could escape the pressure. Now, that may or may not be true. Sometimes people make the compromise and they still don't escape the pressure. But surely the temptation is there. That thought pattern might come to mind. And this is exactly what the Christians who are receiving the book of Hebrews, that's what they're facing. There's pressure on them because of their Christianity. And perhaps some of them had already capitulated. And others were thinking about it, renouncing their connection to Christ and trying to cloak themselves in their old Judaism to escape the pressure, which, as we know our history, it was not a really good move because the Romans were coming after the Jews very soon. Now, to a lesser degree, we face this same pressure anytime we face a decision to speak up for Christ, to identify ourselves as Christians out in our world. When some employer wants you to work every Sunday, I think we want to work with our employers, and maybe there's a rationale where we could help them out and work some Sundays, but sometimes they put pressure. If you don't work on Sunday, I can't have you. Well, that's against the law in BC. They can't say that. But there is that pressure. When someone says something contrary to the Christian faith and expects you to go along with it, to approve it or to laugh at the joke or to affirm their beliefs or whatever it might be. When your authorities demand that you affirm the woke agenda of including deviant behavior as acceptable, there's pressure on your Christian faith. And it may be that we just decide that silence is the better part of wisdom. That's a very small step on the road to what the Hebrew Christians were facing. It's maybe not as intense, it's maybe not as drastic, but it's the same kind of pressure. So that's what we're talking about. We could go on with examples about this. We compare these smaller challenges to the life and death challenges that people, for example, in Sudan are feeling. It may seem a little bit trivial and frivolous, but I want to say that this challenge and this temptation is the same. So we're looking now at Moses and his parents. Now both his parents first and then Moses himself face situations where deciding to identify with God, to follow God's will, meant putting themselves, their lives at risk from the state, which means from Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And we will find that both Moses and his parents expressed enduring faith. So let's read our passage. I'm going to read a section beginning in verse 23. We're just going to be looking at verse 23 to 26 for today. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, and fearing the wrath of the king, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea, as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. That's our passage. I guess I'm going through verse 27. Now, some commentators, I have my notes are all wrong here. Let's see. No, that's right. I'm reading my numbers wrong. I'm really not with it today. I don't know what's wrong with me. All right, so in verse 27, there's the section I'm just choosing through verse 26, considering the reproach of Christ greater than the rich treasures of Egypt. Then he says, by faith he left Egypt. Now, there's a question as to which leaving of Egypt is meant by this verse. Some commentators think it's the leaving that has to do when he fled Egypt after it was known that he had killed an Egyptian. So the first time. Other commentators think this is his leaving Egypt when he left with the children of Israel in the Exodus. And I think there's good reasons for both, but the verse is ambiguous. But I'm going to put it with leaving Egypt during the Exodus, and we'll talk about that next Sunday. So here's my proposition for today's message. Enduring faith stands up when fear says, sit down. Enduring faith stands up when fear says, sit down. So I really have 2 points today. We're going to talk about Moses' parents and then Moses. So first of all, standing against evil. Verse 23. We are talking about, here it says, by faith Moses, when he was a child, let me read it again, when he was born, was hidden. Well, Moses was a baby. He wasn't hiding himself. It wasn't his faith. It was the faith of his parents. One of the commentators says this section concerning Moses actually begins with the faith of Moses' parents. Now we have very few details about the life of Moses at this time. We know the story, and we're going to rehearse the story of him as a baby and what happened to him. And we know that eventually his mother came into Pharaoh's daughter's employ as a nurse for Moses. And I'm sure Pharaoh's daughter knew what was going on, but she just went along with it. And we know that she must have had some contact with Moses for some time before Moses was then put into whatever kind of home situation Pharaoh's daughter was going to create for him, whatever kind of education system they had. They must have had something. And he would grow up. And Stephen says in his sermon in Acts that he spent 40 years amongst the Egyptians before he left after the incident with slaying the Egyptian. So he had a long time with the Egyptians, growing in his understanding and his education and his viewpoint. But we know very little about his family life. However, it seems to me that this example, the example of his parents' faith when he was born, was replicated and taught to him by his mother and perhaps his father as they had contacts through the years, and his faith imitated their faith. It seems to me that it must be so. The Bible doesn't say so, however, so we want to note that. That is speculation on my part. All right, now, think about the fear that Amram and Jochebed, that's the names of Moses' parents. And those, by the way, are good names. Bible names, you could choose that for your kids. That would be good. Coming up, I know we have some babies coming up, so who knows? There's some candidates. Amram and Jochebed. Now, when Moses was born, there was, I'm going to share some verses from Exodus chapter 1. And by the way, we probably should turn to Exodus chapter 2 while we're thinking about it, because I have a lengthy section there, and I don't have room on the screen for all of that. So if you want to have your finger over at Exodus chapter 2 and one in Hebrews, and we'll come back to Hebrews eventually. But we want to talk about this faith of his parents when Moses was a baby. Now, we're going to start in chapter 1. You guess you can look there. I'm going to put some of it on the screen at this point. So Exodus 1, verses 8 to 10. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So we closed Genesis with Joseph being number 2 in the Egyptian kingdom. He was a very important official. Now we're talking several 100 years, about 320 years maybe after, or at least a couple hundred, after the death of Joseph. And now there's another Pharaoh on the throne. He does not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land." Now it's interesting to me, this is just a side note as we're looking at this text, it's interesting to me that his fear is that they would depart, not that they would take over. Isn't that interesting? He says they're more and mightier than we. Why wouldn't he say, we need to be wise, because what if they take over and kick us out? That would be the natural, I suppose, threat. But he had a notion that the Israelites would want to leave, and of course they did. And that's interesting. That's something extra. I just noticed that as I was reading that. Anyway, you see, he wants to deal wisely with them. So, his wise dealing, what does that entail? So verse 15 and 16 of chapter 1, "Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah." Here's another couple of great names, Bible names. All right, and he said, "When you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live." So that was his solution. Let's start at least a halfway genocide. Let's kill all the boy babies. That seems like his next solution to this problem of too many Israelites. All right, so the midwives, of course, they had faith in God, and so they slow walked against this decree. I forget, there's a term, a work slowdown. They operated a work slowdown here. Their union demanded that they not follow the Pharaoh's commands, and so they said, "Oh, those Hebrew women, they're too quick for us. They have their boy babies really fast. You know, we're there for the girls, but we're not there for the boys." I don't know how that works. They're so quick. Anyhow, so Pharaoh then escalated his attacks. In verse 22, he says, the Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive." So what he's saying to the Egyptians now, not to the midwives, he is saying, if you see a boy baby in Israel, you are authorized to take that child and throw him in the Nile. Okay, so that was his decree. Now, the parents of Moses acted contrary to the command of Pharaoh. So here's where we're going to look at chapter 2 and just read through and rehearse in our minds the story of what they did in their actions in chapter 2 of Exodus. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was beautiful, and there's that word again, our translators translate it that way. We'll talk about that in a little bit. She hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to the bathe at the Nile with her maidens walking alongside the Nile, and she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse for you from among the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go ahead. So the little girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, and said, because I drew him out of the water. Now that's as far as we want to read in this section of Exodus chapter 2. So, the baby was born. He was a beautiful child. He was hidden by the parents for 3 months, but as he begins to become aware, he's able, I suppose, I don't know how old. How old do they start lifting their head? How old is that? About 3 months? Earlier than that. Okay, so he's probably not crawling yet. So you can leave him in that basket during the day. You can hide him during the day, and he's not going to move around, but he will make noise. And so we find that he's crying, and perhaps that's what attracts the attention. In any case, he is found in this little ark on the river of the Nile, where they were hiding him. Now, I always wonder, did they know of the habits of the princess? Did they know that she might come by there? Were they trying to set things up this way? We don't know the answer to that question. Nevertheless, the child was rescued and then protected by the princess. Now, there's a whole lot of politics going on. There's a little bit of debate as to which daughter of Pharaoh this was, a little bit of debate as to which one she might have been. I like to think it was Hatshepsut, but I don't know for sure that it was Hatshepsut. But there are different, in the history of the pharaohs of Egypt, there are different candidates suggested. But in the politics, if it was Hatshepsut, you're going to find that she is going to vie herself for the throne of Egypt, and for a period of time will reign as pharaoh. And so perhaps she sees, or perhaps she has a little bit of an attitude towards her father's rule at this point. And she's going to play political games of her own. And so she may see some political advantage. Or it may be simply human compassion that motivates her to take the child. Anyway, she does take the child. And so then his mother, Jochebed, is brought into her employ as the child's nurse. And as I said, surely Pharaoh's daughter knew pretty well what was going on. This was indeed the child's mother. Probably she knew that without anybody having to say it. Now, what were the motivations of Moses' parents in this situation? Besides natural parental love, like which one of you are going to say, okay, well, it's the law, I've got to hand over my boy babies to be killed? How many of you think that's a good idea? Nobody, right? We're not going to do that. Okay, so what do we do next? And in fact, this is one of those situations where the government is commanding something that is evil. The Bible does tell us to obey the authorities that are over us, but when they command something that is evil, then we have to obey God rather than man. So that's the scriptural principle there. But anyway, so what is it that we see in the scriptures? It says the child was beautiful. He was beautiful. And I guess, let's see, I do have that verse. I want to put that. The King James says goodly there. And the word in Hebrew is the word when it says God saw all that he created, and behold, it was very good. It's exact same word. All he created, it was very, the Hebrew word is tov. And the idea has not just the idea of moral goodness or rightness or perfection, but it also includes the idea of being just perfect. Beautiful is a good way to translate this word. In the Hebrew, back over in Genesis or Hebrews chapter 11, in Hebrews, in the Greek, it says another word which has the connotation of being beautiful or attractive in terms of being well formed. So some babies, everybody says babies are beautiful. Now, I think babies are babies. Most babies, now once in a while, you'll see one little baby and you think that baby is perfect. Now, I will say that of people other than my own grandchildren. I mean, obviously, my grandchildren are perfect. But, but you'll see a baby in that one, you say, wow, that is a beautiful baby. That's what Moses was. He was especially attractive. Now, the commentators divide here. Some think that there was something unusual about the baby's look that made the parents think this baby is special. He has God's hand on him. So some commentators think that. Some think that God communicated something to them about this baby. Now, we have no Bible for either one of those options. There was something about the baby that, though, motivated, that's the thing that said he was beautiful or goodly, the King James says. There's something about the way this baby looked that motivated in an extra degree their desire to hide their son from the authorities. And we'll want to notice this reference from, Hebrews 11. Notice it says at the end of the verse, they were not afraid. They were not afraid of the king's edict. Why were they not afraid? They had their eyes on God, not on the king. They themselves were people, and I wonder if they weren't people who had an inkling that there was something about their own family that was special. Now, in the genealogies in the Pentateuch, we see that Amram was Levi's grandson. Levi was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, one of the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jochebed was Levi's daughter, according to the genealogies in the Pentateuch. Now, the commentaries insist that there must have been generations intervening between these people and Levi. The reason they say is because they would be very old when Moses was born, a couple hundred years old. And that's kind of bracing, isn't it, to think that way? If Jochebed, I've calculated it out one time, if Jochebed was born in the last year of Levi's life, she would still have been well over 100 years old when Moses was born. That seems remarkable. And so the commentators want to say, well, there must be generations in there that aren't mentioned. But must there be? I often think. And the Bible doesn't say so. Must there be? God has done this before. God has had unusual births before. And this woman has apparently, fairly recently, been having children. Her daughter, Miriam, is only a few years older than Moses. Her son, Aaron, born before the decree, is younger than Miriam, but only a few years older than Moses. I wonder if there is something like this going on. This woman has waited a long time for children. And now the Pharaoh's going to kill my boy? You think she's going to stand for that? I'll tell you what. She'll die before that boy dies. Right? I'm sure she is. And I think perhaps that they have the sense that God has given them this long life for a reason. And now He's given them these children for a reason. And she's right. She's right. And He's right, the Father. All right? Now, one of the commentators says in Hebrew, they were not afraid. That is not stated in Exodus, but it is stated in Hebrews. And the commentators say this is a deduction from the text, but it makes sense to me, and of course it's correct because it's in Hebrews. This is the bottom line of their enduring faith. The temptation to compromise your Christianity is based on fear. When you are in a situation and the conversation turns in such a way that you know you have an opening to say something about the gospel to somebody else, and you open your mouth, and what do you say? Oh, nice weather we're having in this week. Is that what you say? Why would you do that? Change the subject. Back down. Why? Because of fear. They were not afraid. Enduring faith is the opposite of fear. Enduring faith stands up when fear says, sit down. All right, second point, standing against ease. The first was standing against evil. They're standing against the decree of the king. Second point, standing against ease. And we're going to think about Moses' situation. Verses 24 to 26. I'm back in Hebrews now. I'm not thinking about, I will probably quote a little bit from somewhere else, but I'm going to be in Hebrews now pretty much the rest of the way. So, all right, by faith Moses, when he had grown up, this is kind of a funny, this is a little, it's in there. The Hebrew, or the Greek idiom here is having become mega. Okay? Literally, the Greek word is mega. Having become mega, that means growing up. That's their idiom for growing up. And you find it in several other places in the scriptures. It's kind of, to me, it's funny. I don't know if it is to you. You didn't laugh, so I'm not sure. Okay? All right. So Moses decided, as he has become mature, he's gained in strength. He had the benefit of all the latest education of Egypt. He had the benefit of living in the court of Egypt. He had the benefit of power and prestige and being a part of the royal family and being a part of the political machine and being part of those who ruled and not those who were being ruled. He had that benefit. But he decided to self-identify as an Israelite. Stephen said this in his sermon in Acts chapter 7, and he, Moses, supposed that his brethren understood that God was granting them deliverance through him, but they did not understand. So Moses at this point in his life thought, why did God give me all of this training? Why did God give me these riches? Why did God give me this position? He must mean something for Israel. For God must mean to use me for Israel at this point in time. And so he stood up, supposing that his brethren would say, "Oh, Moses, you're our deliverer." Well, they did not understand. But what we are seeing in Hebrews, that his actions, by his actions, he is turning his back on his privileged position. So a quote from one of my commentaries, I can put it on the screen because it's lengthy and I want you to get this one. By his forceful intervention on behalf of a Hebrew slave, Moses confessed himself to be a Hebrew and thus effectively denied that he was the son of Pharaoh's daughter. What is described is a personal moral decision between two alternatives rather than a formal legal renunciation. He didn't go on to the court of Egypt and say, that deal about me being the son of Pharaoh's daughter, I'd like to get the form where I can renounce that. He didn't do that. He instead took action on the behalf of an Israelite and protected him, identifying himself to the people of Israel as one who wants to be among them, one who wants to be part of their number, one who wants to be coming to their defense. That's what he did. His forceful intervention is the action that brought about this decision and this identification. Now, that's the first verse that we see here. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So that happened by his action. Now, their reasons are given in the next two verses. First of all, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Okay? The passing pleasures of sin. Obviously, I'm remembering the King James there. Okay, so first of all, by making his choice, Moses was choosing ill treatment as his most likely feature. Ill treatment, the word is one that is apparently coined by the writer of Hebrews. It means to have evil with. Okay, he's going to have evil. Whatever bad things come to Israel because of their position in Egypt, I am going to identify with them, and I am willing to accept the evil that comes with being an Israelite in Egypt at this time. So Moses knew how his people, God's people, were being treated by the Pharaoh. And it's not just the earlier persecution of the male babies 40 years before that he is thinking of. There's a new Pharaoh by this time. And it is now that the Israelites are in slave labor to the Egyptians. Moses is putting his lot in with his brethren. He knows what he's doing. He's making a choice. He is going to choose, and he's going to turn back on the privileges that the enjoying, it says, the passing pleasures of sin. Literally then temporarily to have of sin enjoyment is how the word order works. One could rationalize, here Moses, think about this. You are in the power structure. You have wealth. You have position. You could be a great advocate for Israel in the court. You could lessen their burdens. Why don't you just stay where you are and work in the court of Pharaoh and pull the political strings and make things better for Israel? That's the rationale. People often say, we need Christians in government in order to, affect the way government runs. Well, I'm not against Christians being in government, but that ought not to be our motivation. All right? The protection of God's people depends on God, not on politics. Okay? It doesn't matter. We could have no Christians in government, and God can still protect Christians. Okay, so our motivation isn't, I'm going to be some great person and I'm going to solve all these problems for Christians. No. If you're led to serve in your community, that's one thing. That's fine. I'm not against that. But you got to get your head around where our protection is. It's not in politics. It's in God. That's where it is. All right. Moses, however, chose a path that put him into the plight of his people. It divorced him from his privilege. And this is exactly the state that the early Jewish Christians who are receiving this book from the writer of Hebrews are in. They are under pressure. And there is a rationale that says, well, if I just keep quiet about Christianity, things will go easier. I can maybe gain a position of influence. I can maybe help somebody else in the Christian church, maybe make things easier for them. There's all kinds of rationales for doing such things. But what Moses did is he identified with the children of Israel, laying aside the pleasures of sin. And we often think about the indulgences that he might be able to enjoy in the palace. I don't think that's it. I think it's just this pleasure of being safe. The fruit of being a part of an evil system. And with the notion that somehow you'll be the great deliverer. But no, he says, leave that all behind. I'm going to be a part of my people. And then he gives us a value judgment. Considering the reproach of Christ, this is verse 26, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. All right? So, this is the heart of Moses' motivation. Now, there is a curious expression here. He says, considering the reproach of Christ. Now, is there something about that raises a question in your mind? Here's Moses. He is approximately, let me think, this is approximately 1850 or 1900 BC. So it's almost 2,000 years until Christ will be born. In fact, there is no written Hebrew scripture at this point. No one has ever heard of a Messiah at this point. Isaiah has not come along. He's another 1,100 years away. The suffering servant and all those prophecies. Moses himself has yet to write the Pentateuch. He hasn't written down these words. There'll be a prophet like unto you, Moses. He doesn't know about a Messiah, so why does the writer of Hebrews say, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt? All right, so he had no revelation of Christ. But the expression belongs to the author of Hebrews. He evaluates the reproach that Moses values as the same thing as the reproach of Christ. The reproach of Israel was what Moses evaluated. The reproach of Christ is the same thing. The reproach of Israel in Egypt is, for the author of Hebrews, the same as the reproach of Christ in the first century. That's what I'm trying to say. There is a parallel. The reason that Israel is despised and persecuted in Egypt is not because they're numerous and a threat to the Egyptians. It's because they are the people of God. Because they are the people of God in that time. The reproach of Christians, the reproach of Christ for Christians in the first century, is not because they are so different from other people, but because Christ is now the answer to the world's problems. The reproach is the antagonism of Satan towards the people of God. But he says, Moses evaluates, this reproach, this stigma that comes from identifying with God is greater riches than the Egyptian treasures. Okay, greater riches than the Egyptian treasures. This refers to all the treasures belonging to the Pharaoh who owned everything in Egypt, thanks to Joseph way back when. Okay? The comparison is comparing fabulous earthly wealth with the reproaches of something invisible. You see, it says Moses was looking to the reward. Okay? The text doesn't specify the reward, but it says Moses believed in it. So here's the thing. When we are confronted with pressure about our Christianity, there may be something tangible that you have to lose. A promotion at work, the friendship of another person, the esteem of the public, being well thought of. Those are tangible things in our present situation, and you're going to lose that because of something that's invisible, something you believe. You see, that's the choice. Enduring faith stands up when fear says sit down. Now, when we talk to people in our world, we do need to learn how to speak. We need to learn how to say things. You know, you can say things, speak for Christ in a defiant way. You can speak for Christ in a way that brings no credit to Christ. You can say the right thing in the wrong way. But nevertheless, the pressure from the world is always for the Christian to say nothing against its sin. To have no witness at all for Jesus Christ. Why don't you just keep quiet? I remember picking up a hitchhiker. I don't really recommend picking up hitchhikers, but I was young then. I was driving through the parks. I think I was in either Banff or Jasper, and the guy was heading my way, so I picked him up and we talked. And of course, back then I was young and zealous, and I started witnessing to him. We had a long conversation. It was very interesting. And he said at the end, or near the end, he says, well, why do you bother? He says, you know that I don't believe in this. Why do you bother bringing this up? Well, I believe it, and I'm concerned for other people. That's why I bring it up. What would you think if I knew that you were in danger of something terrible and I refused to tell you about it? Okay, and so that was sort of the end of the conversation. I forget where I dropped him off, but I remember that bit of the conversation. Okay? People don't want you to talk to them about Jesus Christ. They don't want you to talk to them about spiritual things. They especially don't want you to talk to them about sin. Okay? And the pressure can push believers to silence, or even worse, to denial of the faith. Enduring faith stands up when fear says sit down. That's our message for today. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Our Father, we thank you for this passage, for the example of Moses. We thank you for his faith that endured despite all of the pressure that was on him. Lord, we pray that you would help us as we walk with you. Help us not to be succumb to the temptation to compromise our faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Help us to be a witness for you wherever we go. In Jesus' name, amen.